Listen, I know. I know. So the last 8 months were pretty crazy. Nowhere near as bad as my catastrophically disastrous 2024, where it seemed like Creepy Murphy over there was trying to make my life miserable. No, 2025 was just a slow, tiring year. But I got a lot done. You see, in the second half of 2024, I made a graphical overhaul to my FPS game Unsung Heroes 1898. I upgraded the game to a new version of Unity and to the high-definition render pipeline, allowing the game to have more realistic lighting, water, particle effects, and foliage. However, my gun models, which looked fine when the game looked like a kid's first Roblox project, now looked like moldy shit. It didn't also help that the firearms were completely inaccurate. Like, why is the firing pin on the Krag not moving separately from the bolt assembly? Why is there not a metal butt plate on the back of the Krag or the Trapdoor rifles? Why is the Colt so chunky? Why is the Colt's hammer so lean? What the hell is the hammer even hitting itself? How do you even eject the spent cartridges out of the cylinder without the actual part on the cylinder made for ejection? And what the hell was I smoking when I made the Trapdoor? The barrel literally pops off the frame when you're aiming.
The fuck?
I could go on, but you get the idea. What I need is to fix these models. A remodel of a model, if you will. And so I set out a target for myself. Remodel the models with better details, better accuracy, and with better optimization. Should be easy, like 1 to 2 months, no problem. When remodeling the Krag, I used a few different points of reference. For the original model, I used a side portrait of the firearm, which was great for getting a general idea of how the gun looks, but it doesn't give much insight into the more nitty-gritty side of things. So for the remodel, I used glamour shots from auction sites and from videos of people firing and operating the gun. Even though there were plenty of areas of the gun that did not need any additional detail or correction, I still had to remodel them due to a new modeling technique I learned: hard surface modeling.
What the hell is that?
According to the big-brained individuals of Reddit, hard surface modeling involves making models that don't deform easily and have a rigidly defined shape. Which answers basically nothing. So here's my definition. Depth. Take a look at the side-by-side of Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 6, and what do you notice? Firstly, that Battlefield 3 still looks incredible a decade and a half later, but also the difference in visual fidelity. Look at the gloves in Battlefield 3. See those rough edges where the polygons are? Or how about the steel beams that look kind of flat around those sharp edges? Even the firearm has fairly noticeable polygonal shapes. The wizards at DICE knew this limitation at the time and used very clever texture techniques to hide those sharp edges, which works well enough for the most part. However, with Battlefield 6, things are quite different. Look at how smooth the gloves are. Those steel beams before have so much more depth and detail. And the gun? Even the hardest edges look smooth enough to glide your hand over. And this is the secret sauce to hard surface modeling. No sharp edges and no easily spottable polygons. Every vertex point needs to be smooth. Even parts of the gun that should be sharp have beveled edges. The new model feels more real and tangible. It's smooth and yet somehow even more pronounced. These bevels go far beyond the easily spottable. This small sharp looking edge on the front iron sight actually has very tiny bevels that make it pop just a bit more. And on the front of the barrel, I don't even know how I could have lived with myself for so long with that flat face. It looks like a pug.
But Ducky, first off, I like pugs.
Okay.
And second, won't adding more polygons to your model make the game's performance worse?
Yes and no. On one hand, this gun model will have its poly count quadrupled over the course of the remodel, which would usually cause a game to lag further, if it weren't for the game's existing problem of too many draw calls. You see, even with the higher poly count, the end result is still not considered a high poly model, but more of a mid poly model. The real benefit to this new model is that everything is now just a single
material,
and that means fewer draw calls and thus a larger performance gain than what would otherwise be lost with a higher poly model. Oh, you forgot what draw calls are. Okay then. Every computer has two parts, a CPU and a GPU. A CPU is a nerd. He's super smart. He can do all these crazy calculations, but he's also scrawny and weak and can therefore only do a handful of operations at a time. And the GPU is the jock. He's dumb as hell, only basic addition and subtraction, but he's buff and strong and can do thousands of these kinds of operations in milliseconds. The CPU is good for game logic, AI, and physics, while the GPU is good for graphics rasterization and other rendering processes. Now, when rendering games, the CPU has to tell the GPU what to render. This is called a draw call. One game object with one material requires one draw call per frame. So if you have a game that runs at 60 frames per second, then you need 60 draw calls per second to render this one simple cube. But if we have two objects, each with one material, that's 2 draw calls per frame, or 120 draw calls per second. 3 objects, each with one material, is 3 draw calls per frame. I think you get the idea. But what if we have one object with 2 materials? That's 2 draw calls per frame. 2 objects, each with 2 materials, is 4 draw calls per frame, or 240 draw calls a second. You see the problem? The old Krag model had 8 materials, meaning that if I had a map with 80 soldiers that each had a Krag rifle with them, that's 640 draw calls per frame, or an eye-watering 38,400 draw calls per second. That scrawny nerd is getting put through the ringer, and that's not counting the soldier models themselves, the environment, the UI, and all the other stuff that needs to be rendered, and thus requiring even more draw calls. And kids, get a little closer. This is why modern games run so slow. Every major game you've played in the last few years runs laggily, not because of high poly counts or because of the game's code. That's just what the government wants you to think. No, in reality, the issue is too many draw calls caused by artists not optimizing their textures into one material. Bake your textures down to as few materials as needed, and your game will run like grandma off the Benjamin. So to answer your question, no, this model runs better and looks better, especially around the gate, the bolt, the iron sight, the bayonet, the straps. Oh yeah, I forgot, I added that. Actually, since this video has been in the making for over half a year, here's a short I made about how I made this thing work in game. So, slightly younger and more clean-shaven Ducky, take it away. Rifle slings are pretty important, as they allow soldiers to carry the weapon on their back instead of requiring them to hold it all the time. I wanted to model this for the new weapon model, but we can't just leave it as a static model, and baking an animation is just going to look weird and unnatural. So what better way to make you oogle at a weapon than with some good old physics simulations. First, in Blender, make a model for the sling. Make sure that the sling itself has some slack so it can stretch and move around. We also need a subdivide along the y-axis where we want the sling to be able to bend and deform. Do some UV unwrapping, give it some albedo texture, and then use the texture painting mode to blend the exposed seams. Now we need some bones. Add an armature and place the bones along the sling, making sure that each bone starts and ends at the subdivides. And since we're already doing this for the sling, we can also apply the armature bones for the rest of the gun's moving parts. In edit mode, we'll select the faces within the subdivides and assign the weight to each respective bone. Once you finish giving yourself carpal tunnel, export the model as an FBX and import the model and textures into Unity. We're going to use hinge joints for our sling physics. It works like this. We have an anchor with a collider, rigid body, and hinge joint. So the anchor's rigid body to not use gravity and to be kinematic. And now we're ready for the fun part. Make a bunch of capsules with the same components, but make them use gravity and set the connected body value to the capsule or anchor prior. Then set the last capsule to be kinematic again. And there you go. You just made a hanging bridge, which is pretty much how a rifle sling behaves. Almost.
What the hell?
Alright, so let's apply the same technique on the rifle, but using the bones from the model. Say your anchor, add your components, make the capsule colliders, and...
Failure.
Unity does not like handling hinge physics for a lot of bones. We could increase the frequency at which the engine calculates physics, but this has a performance cost, and I don't want to lose 10 frames for just a visual effect. Instead, we can disable the capsule colliders on the bones, which makes the bones not spaz out and react nicely with each other. But now as we continuously move the model, the sling it begins to elongate and become... blinky. And we don't want that. What's happening is that the anchors for the hinges are constantly moving apart. So simply uncheck auto configure connected anchor and voila. I've also added springs to the bones to make things more stable, but the results are much different. The Colt Model 1892 was really scuffed up. Everything was just completely out of proportion. The gun was missing lots of key designs, and it honestly looked like one of those knockoff gun designs you would see made by some blue-haired individual for a hero shooter. So I took the time to use reference photos, videos of the gun in action, and hold up.
Holy what is that? What the is that?
Listen, I can explain. You are in the right for wondering why I would go through the lengths to painstakingly work on the remodel when there's a perfectly fine 3D model that's publicly available to use that I'm using as reference. So first off, no, I did not copy this model. Everything you see here is based off of the original model I made. I did not want to use someone else's model for a few reasons. First, because I've made most of the 3D assets and animations for the game, meaning I have full ownership of said assets. This ensures that this game will not join the ranks of other asset flip type games and is one less attribution distribution credit I need to worry about. And second, because there are plenty of differences between my model and this publicly available one. The area around the hammer has much more detail. There's a subtle bump between the metal and the wood on the handle of the revolver. And the big elephant in the room, my model follows that hard surface modeling technique mentioned earlier, while this other model uses more flat designs, leveraging some really nice texturing to make up for that lower poly count. Speaking of textures, let me show you how I made them. Once I finish modeling the weapon, I set up the UV layouts, making sure that things aren't too stretched, but also that there aren't a ton of seams that will break up the texture. Then I export the overlay image into GIMP, then I tile these repeated metal and wood textures onto the correct areas of the UV map, giving the gun its base color. I did the same process again for metalness and roughness maps. Then comes the important addition, normal maps. This adds a lot more detail to the object without needing me to model it in. I use this for some of the screws near the revolver cylinder and to make manufacturer engravings. Then when I import everything into Unity, I use this channel packer that I got from GitHub to pack the roughness and metalness maps into a single mask map that, alongside the normal and color textures, create the final material needed to make the revolver. Mwah.
Watermelon.
Honestly, this is where the burnout really started kicking in. I was getting tired of using Blender all the time and wanted to work on other things with the game, which I did, but that's a subject for another video. I had to face the Trapdoor and its numerous bugs head on. The Trapdoor was the first gun I ever modeled, so naturally, I screwed up on a lot of things. For one, the model is broken into multiple pieces, which, while it made modeling the thing in the first place kind of easy, it means that the animations in Unity were completely broken. So with all these remodels, I would work on parts of the gun individually and then join them all together into a single piece. I could then use vertex groups if I wanted to still work on specific parts of the model without breaking things up again. But that was the least of my issues. You see, I thought I would only really need to fix the iron sight, bayonet, and maybe the metal plate on the side of the rifle, since that was never really modeled before and was just a simple ugly texture I slapped on. But no, this gun was pretty much rebuilt from scratch. The barrel made longer and continuous, so you could see from one end to another. The bayonet, well, it was so confusing I remade it twice because I got it wrong after the first attempt to remodel it. The hammer on the old gun was out of proportion and had this ugly screw texture, which I replaced for a fully modeled one. The buttstock not only had to be remodeled with this metal plate, but it also needed this little latch thingy at the back. And the trapdoor, this alone took almost 2 months. The inside chamber had a complete overhaul with all these little details, as did the trapdoor piece, which had so many weird and complex angles everywhere that I had to frequently redo and think hard on how to actually make it. And then there was the texturing issue. You see, my computer was starting to get up in age. I think this model really put its paces on it, because when I first baked the color texture for the rifle, it just crashed. I tried multiple other attempts, but I was not very successful with it. I eventually had to downgrade the resolution of the texture and bake only a few parts of the gun at a time, and even this was slow. The end result, well, the gun does look better than the original model, but it's still got some issues, especially these weird seams which, for whatever reason, I cannot get rid of. But I had spent way too much time on this rifle, so I had to call it done for the time being. I also had to call it done for my PC. After nearly a decade, it was time to get an upgrade, and with RAM prices going nuts, I figured the sooner the better. And voila, here's my new PC, and here's the specs for anyone interested. So there you have it, 3 newly redone firearm models. What else? Oh yeah, Unsung Heroes has a Steam page. That's right, you featherless bipedals that make up the 15% that haven't clicked off the video yet. After all these years, the Steam page is here, and now you can wishlist it. And if you have already wishlisted it, tell your friends to wishlist it. Your dad, your grandma, your pet dog, and your bear that you've trained with malicious intent to overthrow your local government and create propaganda with.
But Ducky, when is the game gonna be released?
Soon. And check out our website with the latest and greatest from Venezuelan security technology. And follow Venomic Games on all social media, and make sure to join the Unsung Heroes community Discord server. And as always, see you in another 9 months. Bye!